Israeli Prime Minister criticizes the implementation of the Iran nuclear deal as the Iranian president claims that everyone is in favor but Israel. A plane carrying freed U.S. prisoners from Iran is en route to Switzerland. And the Syrian regime claims that Islamic State militants killed at least 300 people in the country's east in a wide-scale attacks on the government-held areas, as activists say 400 civilians were abducted in the same assault. Good afternoon. You're watching I-24 News. International sanctions on Iran have been lifted after it was confirmed that it had complied with a deal designed to prevent it from developing nuclear weapons. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu reacted, saying that even after signing the nuclear deal, Iran has not relinquished its ambition to obtain nuclear arms. For his part, Iranian President Rouhani said that everyone supports the agreement except for Israel. I-24 News reporter Danny Swinbell with the latest.
The UN nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, announced Iran was in full compliance with the July deal negotiated between 6 world powers and Iran over the restriction of its nuclear program. Sanctions against Tehran, described as crippling, were in turn lifted. EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini said in a statement that was also read in Farsi by Iran Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif that the historic deal had gone into full force.
Ever since adoption day, we worked hard and showed mutual commitment and collective will to finally bring the JCPOA to implementation.
Its proper implementation will be a key contribution to improved regional and international peace, stability, and security.
Within minutes, the United States formally lifted banking, steel, shipping, and other sanctions on Iran, a major oil producer which has been virtually shut out of international markets for the past 5 years. Tens of billions of dollars worth of Iranian assets will now be unfrozen, and global companies that have been barred from doing business there will be able to exploit a market hungry for everything from automobiles to airplane parts.
Iran has undertaken significant steps that many, and I do mean many, people doubted would ever come to pass.
The end of sanctions means more money and prestige for Shiite Muslim Iran, as it becomes deeply embroiled in the sectarian conflicts of the Middle East, notably in the Syrian civil war where its allies are facing Sunni Muslim rebels. In turn, the deal has been viewed with deep suspicion by American allies in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Regarding the Iran nuclear deal, Israel will continue monitoring any international breaches by Iran, including the nuclear deal, the ballistic missile deal, and terrorism.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani hailed the deal as a, quote, golden page in the country's history, but noted bitter opposition from arch-foe Israel, some members of the U.S. Congress, and what he calls, quote, warmongers in the region, a clear reference to some of Tehran's Gulf Arab adversaries.
And earlier we spoke with I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev about Jerusalem's next move.
Jerusalem's main concern now is that cash that will be injected into the Iranian economy will be used not for civilian infrastructures or investments, but rather to bolster military capabilities and strengthen the terror proxies such as Hezbollah and Hamas. And Jerusalem is moving to the next level, which is verifying and warning from violations and also building deterrence. Netanyahu mentions at the cabinet meeting that Israel and the U.S. are close to closing the discussions on the memorandum of understanding, which basically will constitute the U.S. Military aid to Israel in the next decade. And practically, the Israeli pressure on the United States will continue to go through Congress. We already hear Republicans issuing stark warnings that Congress will ensure that violations will not be left unanswered and impose new sanctions in case of a breach. And Israel intends to be there to unify them of any violation or any breach.
And a plane carrying freed U.S. prisoners from Iran, including Washington Post reporter Jason Rezaian, is now en route to Switzerland. Meanwhile, in Geneva, official U.S. and Iranian planes can be seen parked side by side on the tarmac at the city's airport, awaiting their arrival. ABC News has the story.
5 Americans homeward bound after a controversial agreement to exchange prisoners with Iran. And within hours of the deal, international inspectors certified that Iran had kept its part of a nuclear deal brokered by the United States, ending years of Western economic embargoes.
In return for the steps that Iran has taken, the United States and the EU will immediately lift nuclear-related sanctions
Secretary of State John Kerry insisted this was not a quid pro quo.
While the two tracks of negotiations were not directly related,
but claimed the nuclear diplomacy eased the way for the prisoner swap. The freed Americans include Washington Post Bureau Chief Jason Runzian, convicted of espionage by a secret Iranian court, Pastor Saeed Abendini, imprisoned since July for organizing home churches in Iran. All spent time at Iran's notorious Evin prison, where they were allegedly subjected to beatings, solitary confinement, and psychological abuse. 2 other Americans were also released, including a student named Matthew Trevithnik, who was arrested a few months ago. In exchange for the release of the Americans, the U.S. dropped charges against 7 Iranians, along with international arrest warrants issued by the U.S. against 14 other Iranians. But the agreement does not include former FBI agent Robert Levinson, who disappeared during a 2007 visit to Iran. His fate is unknown.
And in other news, according to activists, the Islamic State group abducted at least 400 civilians, including women and children, in Syria's eastern city of Deir ez-Zor during a deadly assault. They were then transported to areas under IS control further west. Now, the attack yesterday reportedly killed at least 85 civilians and 50 regime forces. Meanwhile, quoting residents, state news agency SANA said around 300 civilians were killed in the, quote, massacre. If confirmed, it would mark one of the bloodiest days in Syria's nearly 5-year war. And in a televised address to the nation last night, Burkina Faso's president said 2 Australian nationals had been kidnapped overnight near the border with Mali. A family spokesperson of the Australian couple said today that they had dedicated their lives to providing medical services to people in the remote north of the country. The president made the announcement during his address following an al-Qaeda terror attack on the capital that killed 28 people and wounded dozens.
A full alert has been issued to the defense and security forces in the area to find them and catch the kidnappers. The government has already been handed instructions to take the necessary measures given the circumstances to reinforce security around institutions, sensitive public places, as well as our borders and the entrances to our big cities. We will have to implement them rigorously and with discipline because from now on, the fight against terrorism is now part of our daily lives.
And in other world news, Taiwan's independence-leading opposition leader Tsai Ing-wen won a convincing victory in presidential elections on Saturday and pledged to maintain peace with giant neighbor China, which warned it would oppose any move towards independence. Here's more.
Taiwan elected independence-leaning opposition leader Tsai Ing-wen as its first woman president, who could usher in a new round of uncertainty with China, the massive neighbor that claims a self-ruled island as its sacred territory.
Sides have a responsibility to do their utmost to find mutually acceptable ways to interact with respect and reciprocity and ensure no provocation and no surprises. The outcome of today's elections represents the will of the Taiwanese people. The Republic of China, as a democratic country, is the root of 23 million Taiwanese people. Our democracy, national identity, and international space must be fully respected, and any suppression would undermine the stability of cross-strait relations.
Some analysts say maintenance of the status quo between Taiwan and China would benefit both countries.
Many of Tsai Ing-wen's reforms could not be realized without stable cross-strait relations. She will think about the strategy, like she said, of how to maintain the status quo and peace and stability.
Many Beijing residents fear Tsai Ing-wen's victory in Taiwan's national elections will have a negative impact on cross-strait relations.
Her view is that there are 2 Chinas. Doesn't correspond at all with the opinions of the mainland leadership. It's very different. She belongs to a different camp. But I don't see this in a good light at all, because I think all of us belong to one country. I think we should remember this.
Mainland officials said the Chinese mainland will continue to uphold the 1992 consensus reached with Taiwan and strongly opposes Taiwan's independence.
And moving now to the U.S., at least 2 people were killed in Florida when tornadoes tore through Sarasota County overnight. A man and woman are believed to have been killed when the farmhouse collapsed, and there were allegedly 3 adults and 4 children in the home at the time. And the survivors are being treated at a nearby hospital. At least 4 tornadoes touched down in the county, and numerous homes and businesses were damaged during the storms. And these were the latest headlines. Thank you for watching.